Since the day I joined Draxwell and Horn, I knew I would have to fight harder than anyone else. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty, built in every sideways glance I received, in every thankless task I was assigned, in every meeting where my opinion was only considered after a man repeated it. My name is Amelia Carter, and if there's one way to explain how I rose professionally, it would be with two words: silent persistence. A persistence that didn't draw attention, but was as constant as a clock. I was never the loudest in the room. I never had to act arrogant or raise my voice to be heard. My strength was in the details, in my ability to observe before acting, to anticipate problems before they emerged. It was as if I could see the board before the pieces moved. I started as a junior analyst in the finance department, one of the most overlooked and underestimated positions in the company. My days were filled with tasks no one wanted to do, answering emails that required patience and accuracy, organizing spreadsheets that seemed endless, reviewing numbers upon numbers like riddles to be solved. But I liked it, because where others saw routine, I saw patterns. Where they saw chaos, I saw logic. And little by little, I turned small fixes into major contributions. I grew steadily, earning the trust of clients who began calling me directly, colleagues who came for help after hours, and eventually, executives who noticed me not for what I said, but for what I delivered. For 7 years, I climbed every rung of that company as if it were my personal mountain, each step marked by sleepless nights where the silence of the office was my only company. I delivered projects with excellence, met goals that seemed impossible, and often went beyond, without recognition. I endured exhaustion, canceled meetings, and unfair deadlines. I learned to be discreet but effective, to solve problems without drama, to lead without a title. Every challenge I overcame was another tool in my arsenal. Every whispered compliment by the coffee machine reminded me I was on the right path. And even without the spotlight, I knew that position would one day be mine. When the opening for Chief Operations Officer was announced, my heart raced. Not only because I knew I was ready, but because I had already been informally approached by 2 vice presidents. "The position is basically yours, Amelia. It's long overdue," they told me with knowing smiles. I began mentally planning the changes I would make, the process improvements, the people I wanted to promote. It wasn't empty ambition, it was a calling. I was ready to make a difference on a new level. There was no other candidate as prepared, with such a long history in the company, with such earned, quiet respect. I knew that. And that's exactly why what came next hit me like a punch. It wasn't just a shattered expectation. It was the erasure of a journey. It was a rainy Friday when I got the email. Emergency meeting in the auditorium called by the CEO, Jonathan Draxwell. The subject was unclear, but it was obvious something major was about to be announced. The buzz in the hallways was almost deafening. When we all gathered, I saw hopeful, excited faces. Some colleagues gave me knowing looks. One of them whispered, smiling, "Congrats in advance. We all know it's you." Jonathan took the stage with the charisma that made him likable even to those who feared him. His voice commanded the room. He smiled, adjusted the microphone, and said, "I'm pleased to announce the new Chief Operations Officer of Draxwell and Horn, my nephew, Owen Draxwell." The world stopped. My stomach sank like I had swallowed stones. The auditorium went silent for one eternal second. Owen walked in smiling, wearing a clearly new suit and a carefree expression, as if the position were just another natural extension of his existence. He had joined the company only 6 months prior, coming from a failed startup funded by his uncle. He had never led anything real, never fought for space. And yet there he was. I had no time to react. Everyone applauded, some with fake enthusiasm, others out of pure obligation. I remained seated, heart pounding, face flushed, as if I had been slapped in public. Every clap felt like mockery. Jonathan didn't look at me once. It was as if I were invisible, as if my entire history had been erased with a signature. That night, I didn't sleep. I relived every moment of my journey, every weekend lost, every canceled trip, every dawn I cried from exhaustion but kept going. I remembered the Christmas I spent alone in the office finishing a report that saved the company from $1 million fine. I remembered the project I led that brought in the largest international contract in the company's history. I remembered all the times I was called to put out fires without ever receiving credit. I remembered everything. And I cried. But by the time the sun began to rise, something inside me shifted. The pain gave way to a cold, rational clarity I had never felt before. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to play the victim. I wasn't going to bow to injustice. I would respond in my own way. No yelling. No complaining. No begging. I was going to take the company. And I would start where they least expected, from the shadows. With patience. With strategy. With the same silence that brought me this far. But this time, sharpened with purpose and fire in my eyes. In the beginning, everything seemed the same. Owen stepped into his new role with the excitement of someone who had just received a new toy. His days were filled with empty speeches, symbolic visits to departments, and a forced presence in meetings where he barely understood the content. The man had charisma, I'll admit. He knew how to smile, shake hands, keep up appearances. But leadership cannot be improvised. And it was there, in that false confidence, that I found my first opportunity. I began to observe, to document, to collect evidence of every slip-up, every rush decision, every mistake he made, without realizing it. It wasn't revenge, it was strategy. I saved emails that contradicted his promises. I recorded meetings where his words revealed his lack of preparation. I noted quiet comments from colleagues who trusted me but were too afraid to speak up. Little by little, I was building a solid, invisible, yet lethal dossier. At the same time, I deepened my presence behind the scenes. I quietly resumed supporting the operations, sales, and compliance teams, even if it meant sleepless nights. When something worked, Owen took the credit. When something failed, he came to me to fix the mess. And I fixed it. Always. With precision. Without the spotlight. Meanwhile, in the silence of the night, I enrolled in an online MBA in corporate leadership and mergers. I studied in secret, at hours no one would suspect. If I was going to take that company, I had to be ready for every scenario. With skill. With vision. With cold calculation. But the turning point came with a detail he overlooked. Owen brought in a friend from his failed startup to act as an external consultant. An arrogant, careless man who didn't understand the company culture. He talked too much. And one day, during a casual coffee, he excitedly revealed a secret project, a strategic restructuring involving massive layoffs and a partial merger with a competing company. That set off all my alarms. I started to investigate, to map out the situation. I discovered weaknesses in the target company structure. I dug through public records, board meeting minutes, old contracts. I reached out to 3 senior board members, quietly, all of whom were dissatisfied with the current leadership. I connected the dots with surgical precision. And I discovered that the company involved was under investigation for tax fraud and money laundering. While Owen and his friend rehearsed their masterstroke, I was closing the net. Documents gathered. Digital evidence saved. Strategic contacts aligned. When the restructuring plan was finally presented in a restricted meeting, I was ready. I stood up calmly, looked around the room, and said, "You're proposing to sell part of this company to a firm currently under federal investigation. And you plan to carry this out without full board approval." Silence. Eyes darted around. Owen turned pale. "I have evidence. And I can present it now, Mr. Draxwell. Or, if you prefer, I can forward it directly to the SEC." The board had shifted. The game had truly begun. And I was the one holding the pieces. After the meeting, the air grew heavy in the halls of Draxwell and Horn. The information hadn't leaked officially, but one look at the executives' faces was enough to see that something had shifted. Owen, for the first time since putting on that director's suit, was cornered. His smiles faded. His steps turned hesitant. And though he kept trying to maintain the posture of a leader, the effort to hide his insecurity was painfully obvious. Jonathan Draxwell, on the other hand, called me into a private conversation the next day. His office was a glass capsule of power, filled with trophies, certificates, and photos of him with important people. But in that moment, he looked vulnerable, sitting in silence, gripping a metal pen with unnecessary force. "Amelia," he finally said, "what you brought up is serious. Very serious. I know. And I have everything documented. The company cannot afford a scandal right now." My voice was calm, but firm. "I chose to come here before taking legal measures. But if necessary, I will." Jonathan looked at me for a long moment. The same man who had once ignored my existence in front of the entire auditorium now saw me as a real threat. But also something else, a solution. "What do you want?" That question hung in the air like bait. And I ignored it for now. I let him think. Let him feel fear. Because it takes more than evidence to win this kind of game. It takes time, emotional control, and long-term strategy. I walked out of that room without demanding anything, but with the certainty that I had just leveled up. And with that, I entered the most dangerous phase, the invisible war. I began to act with even more caution. The support of discontented board members gave me room to move behind the scenes. I invited some of them for discreet coffees, far from headquarters, where I shared ideas, offered visions, and presented projections. I made it seem casual, informal, but every word was calculated. Every sentence, a rehearsal of influence. Meanwhile, I watched Owen deteriorate. He tried to get close to me, perhaps out of fear, perhaps as a tactic. But it was too late. The empathy I once felt for him had been destroyed when he took what wasn't his. He sensed the shift. And the more he tried to win me over, the more pathetic he became. His decisions were questioned more often. His authority weakened. Without realizing it, he became a prisoner of his own arrogance. And at the same time, my presence grew. Without any official title, I was consulted on nearly every important decision. Executives came to me for guidance. Working groups waited for my informal approval. When new projects were proposed, it was my name that guaranteed success. Bit by bit, I became inevitable. But there was still one key piece that had to be moved: the market. With the right contacts, I let whispers reach strategic investors. Small seeds of doubt about the current leadership's stability. Hints that a stronger, silent force was emerging within the company. And as always, the investors reacted. A slight dip in the stock. A pointed question during the quarterly meeting. That was all it took for the board to start demanding more drastic changes. Jonathan tried to resist. Owen tried to hold his ground. But the castle had already cracked. And while everyone looked to the top trying to make sense of what was happening, I remained steady in the underground, where the foundations of the new order were being built. The game is just beginning. With the castle already cracked, all it would take was a well-aimed breath for it to collapse. But I didn't want it to simply fall. I wanted it to crumble in a symbolic way. The kind of downfall that leaves marks, that changes the rules, that rewrites a corporation's legacy. And for that, I needed more than silent influence. I needed strategic visibility. I began to position myself publicly. I joined industry panels, gave interviews to specialized magazines, accepted invitations to leadership and corporate innovation events. In all these appearances, I elegantly referenced Draxwell and Horn's advancements, progress in which I had played a direct role, though still invisible on the org chart. The message was clear. There was a new mind shaping that company, even if no one fully knew her name yet. And then it came. The invitation. One of the company's oldest board members, Richard Allen, invited me to a private lunch. Richard was the kind of man who had been with the company since it was simply Draxwell Incorporated, before the merger with Horn. Conservative, discreet, meticulous, but far more perceptive than he let on. "Amelia, you're transforming this company from the inside out. And we all know it," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "We can't ignore the force you represent anymore. But you need to be prepared for the attacks that are coming." "They've already started," I replied, meeting his eyes. "They just haven't gone public yet." "Yet," he nodded with a faint smile. "But soon, you'll be the most mentioned name in board meetings, whether officially or not." That night, I couldn't sleep. For the first time, not out of rage or exhaustion, but because of something new, responsibility. A different kind of weight. The weight of someone with everything to gain, who can't afford to make mistakes. Not now. Then came the first attempt at a counterstrike. Owen, desperate to reclaim prestige, tried to forge a merger with a rising startup, led by a former colleague of his who still admired him. On the surface, the proposal looked solid. But hidden within were dangerous clauses, including a concealed transfer of shares to Owen himself through a shell fund. This time, I didn't wait. I presented a full report to the legal committee. This time, signed with my name. The matter became institutional. Owen's reputation was damaged, in the eyes of the committee, the legal team, and most importantly, the investor board members. For the first time, I was officially invited to a board meeting as a senior strategic advisor. It was a temporary title, but everyone knew what it really meant. In the following weeks, the name, Amelia Carter, echoed through every layer of the company, from hallway bulletin boards to internal reports. I received invitations to lead initiatives, set objectives, oversee audits. And even if it wasn't official, departments began reporting directly to me. Jonathan called me again. This time, he no longer held a pen. Just a tired, resigned look. "He's sinking everything, Amelia," he said. "I'm no longer in control." "You never were," I replied. "You were just too comfortable to notice." He nodded silently. And then he did what I already anticipated. "If you want the deputy CEO position, it's yours. The board is on board. All you have to do is say yes." But I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because I knew the final move had to be something else. The most symbolic of all. One that didn't just claim the throne, but redefined the entire game. And it was coming. Very soon. It didn't happen at a grand assembly. There were no flashing cameras, no speeches, no fanfare. The most decisive moment of my professional life unfolded on a cloudy Thursday morning, in a glass-walled room on the 31st floor, with only 3 people present: myself, Jonathan Draxwell, and Richard Allen. Jonathan seemed smaller in that room, shrunken from within, even if he tried to hold his posture. His eyes were sunken, his tone softer, hesitant, a shadow of the executive who once commanded silence with a single raised eyebrow. Richard, ever the composed observer, remained calm, but his fingers tapped lightly on his notepad, a gesture of quiet anticipation I had come to recognize as a signal for something irreversible. "Amelia," Jonathan began after a deep breath, "this is no longer a proposal. It's a necessity. The company needs stability. It needs leadership. And there's only one possible name right now." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but dense, the kind of silence that carries years of unresolved tensions, unspoken truths, and the weight of decisions long delayed. I turned to the window. From up there, the city was distant and muted, cars moving like silent ants across gray pavement. A fog had begun to settle on the skyline, almost as if nature itself was holding its breath with me. "I accept," I said. Richard smiled discreetly, his pen now resting still. Jonathan just nodded. That was it. No applause. No congratulations. But I didn't need fanfare. The moment was powerful enough in its quietness. In that instant, I became the new CEO of Draxwell and Horn, a title that had been withheld from me unjustly, now mine not by gift, but by strategy. In the following days, change rippled across every floor. Internal memos were updated. The website reflected the new leadership. My inbox overflowed. Congratulations arrived in waves, some heartfelt, some clearly driven by corporate convenience. What caught me off guard, though, were the anonymous messages. Sticky notes left on my desk. A cup of coffee waiting by my office door with no sender. The elevator ride with a junior employee who whispered, "You give me hope." The quiet ones had noticed. And that was all I needed to know I had done the right thing. But one act remained, the one that would close the loop. I personally requested Owen's termination meeting. HR had suggested a more distant approach, a formal letter and internal announcement, but I insisted on doing it face-to-face. Not for revenge. For accountability. I arrived early and waited alone in the glass room. My hands rested calmly on the table, a single copy of the termination paperwork beside me. Owen arrived 5 minutes late. His posture was stiffer than usual, his shirt slightly wrinkled. He didn't speak first. "Owen," I began, "I won't waste your time with justifications. You never saw me, never acknowledged my work, or the work of so many others who held this company together beneath your shadow. Today isn't about punishment. It's about consequence." He looked away. I could see the struggle in his jaw. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. He simply nodded. And in that single motion, I saw a glimpse of something I hadn't expected from him. Understanding. Maybe regret. Maybe respect. Either way, it was enough. He stood, gathered his things slowly, and left without another word. As he walked down the hall, past the same employees he once ignored, I saw more heads remain bowed than lifted. His legacy had already left him. That afternoon, I gathered the team for an informal address in the entrance hall. No press, no podium. Just people. People who had worked quietly, loyally, for years without recognition. Standing at the foot of the marble staircase, I looked out at them. Dozens of eyes. Some curious. Some tired. Some shining with something new. Pride. This company didn't survive because of titles or inherited power, I said. It survived because of you. The ones who stayed late without being asked. The ones who spoke up when it wasn't safe. The ones who built this place brick by brick without ever seeing their name on the wall. As of today, we write a new story. One where you are seen, heard, valued. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was honest.
And it was enough.
That night, as I stood in the executive suite, now mine, I looked out again over the foggy skyline. It was the same view Jonathan once called his kingdom. But for me, it wasn't a kingdom. It was a mission. The story of a woman who had everything denied to her, and took it all back. With strategy, with intelligence, and without asking permission.